The atomic bomb is a weapon capable of mass destruction. Millions, if not billions, can get killed in a matter of mere hours, destroying all examples of life too unfortunate to be out of its grasp. But even those who aren't immediately killed could die of acute radiation poisoning. They could have witnessed the terrible disfigurement and memories for generations to come. 2 cities in Japan experienced such atrocities in 2 single days. If an atomic bomb had not been dropped on Hiroshima, would the war have ended any different? Would the arms race still have occurred? I feel that this is a topic that needs to talk about and reconsider constantly. Quite frankly, I feel that we have become numb to the reality that is nuclear warfare. This is something that should never have been allowed to happen. Why I believe the immediate usage of nuclear weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified, the long-term effects resulted in a terrible Cold War that was completely unnecessary, but it did come with a new wave of ideas. But I think that this Cold War was truly inevitable despite whether or not those bombs were actually dropped. I think this is a momentously important topic as it was the immediate death of tens of thousands of innocent people. But the question is if these deaths were ultimately justified in terms of an alternative, which could have seen the death of potential millions. This topic has been hotly debated by historians and politicians ever since the event in 1945. It has also been heavily discussed how much of an impact it had over the coming arms race between the USSR and the Western world. Weapons of mass destruction, specifically nuclear, and their justification against the civilian populace is naturally controversial. You could say that they would pressure a country into surrendering without having to destroy more than a couple cities rather than many over a course of multiple years, but the alternative, the instant death of potential millions in a single day. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are naturally an example of interest for these two opposing arguments, as it saw the death of 200,000 people, but instantly ended the war without a grueling and deadly invasion of the archipelago of Japan. Now, with single countries having the ability to wipe the earth clean of life and the constant threat of nuclear Armageddon, what justification still stands for such an outcome of war? My simple answer, there is none. How can one justify killing off millions or even billions just because of simple politics and disagreements? Importantly, I don't believe that the Cold War wouldn't have happened just because these bombs were not dropped. This was the next step of warfare, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki were simply the opening events. For context, I'd like to start off with the immediate usage of nuclear weapons in warfare. The only instance of this, of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At the time of the bombings, the US was gearing up for a terrible land assault of Japan in one Operation Downfall. With the idea of death for the empire, the people of Japan would not give up. The US knew this, so they began to plan an invasion where they estimated millions would die or be injured. The US would lose around 900,000. This number excludes the Navy and Marine Corps. This also excludes the 3.5 million Japanese soldiers and civilians present on the homeland. But then came Little Boy and Fat Man, the 2 bombs to be dropped. The war would come to an end within days of their dropping. The relatively small amounts of Purple Hearts made in preparation for the operation were still being given out 75 years later. This is an extremely important moment in our course, as it showed the event that would forever change war and how it was fought. It showed how it was the alternative to fight the Japanese belief that you could die for your empire before surrendering. This was the only way the US could fight the Japanese belief that had been indoctrinated and saved millions of lives that would have simply been cannon fodder. This opened the eyes of the world for what was to come. Following the events of World War II, specifically the bombing of mainland Japan by nuclear weapons, a sort of arms race would begin. Major powers of the world like the US and USSR would begin a sort of competition to create the most destructive weapon on the largest scale. This is what we know as the nuclear arms race, closely connected with the idea of one Cold War. The exact date of this nuclear arms race is given to August 29, 1949, where the Soviet Union tested their first atomic bomb, thus ending the American monopoly over the nuclear weapons and starting the race. Ever since then, major powers of the world have been using nuclear weapons as a sort of deterrent to war. This is what we call the Cold War. This created global unrest that would result in things like the descending of the Iron Curtain over Europe, and this created the division that we saw in Berlin between the two sides of this city. While the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki opened the world to nuclear warfare, this was no new idea. Governments all over the world suspected this was a possibility and had already been on a path to achieve such a weapon. The dropping these bombs may have just sped them up a couple of years. Now, we've talked about the numbers and the global effects of the bomb, but what actually happened on the ground? One of the best ways to look at the bombings was the effect of an ordinary person. There are 3 main ways someone would die during one of these explosions. Number 1, burns. These burns were usually caused by the flash fall and explosion and could even imprint the design of your clothes onto your skin. The next was mechanical death, which included falling or flying debris and immediate blast effect. The last is radiation injuries caused by gamma radiation spread immediately after the explosion. These are terrible ways to die, and many of them are grueling and can last even days until death. There is absolutely no justification for these things. Many of these realities would be photographed and documented. And now we can look back at these terrible things and truly understand them. This is similar to the photos in the Documentation Museum in Munich and their purposes. Photos of this terrible event allow us to acknowledge the event and provide hope that it may never happen again. In conclusion, while the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved millions of lives and can be easily justified, it should never have to happen again, especially with today's weapons. But if the bombings didn't happen, the weapons we see today would likely still exist. In fact, it could be worse. Imagine if we hadn't seen the destruction and human effects these bombs had. Imagine if we didn't understand what was at play here. Imagine all the times we didn't fall into nuclear war because we knew of the destruction that would ensue. Our understanding of war provided by these events allow us to step away from war whenever possible. That is an unfortunate reward to what humanity has done to each other and will always be hard to forget.